Smashing. Okay. So let's kick off. What we're seeing in the market is that change is becoming there's more and more change going on, and the complexity is increasing all the time. So as you can see from this slide, we have undertaken some categorization of the projects that we're involved in. We're finding that nowadays roughly 8 in 10 are classified as highly complex. That's actually increased from 5 in 10 just a few years ago. So we're seeing the complexity rate increasing quite steeply. We speak to an awful lot of organizations, and we're also hearing a very consistent trend that the volume of change in many organizations is increasing quite steeply. We've used the 30 to 50% estimate there, which seems roughly in line with what many of our clients are telling us. The key thing there is that the demand is kind of increasing steeply, but the capacity to meet that demand is rarely increasing by the same amount. And the phrase that we keep hearing over and over again is that people are feeling a sense of change saturation. So within your organizations, you might have a list of priorities, coming from the leadership. You might have have some processes in place to be looking at how to kind of assemble a portfolio. But many people are saying it just feels like they're trying to do too much, and there's often a sense of it feeling really chaotic and unachievable. I guess just to kick things off, if you've felt like this, or if any of these phrases on the screen strike you as familiar, then could you just give a click on the reaction at the top of the screen? There we go. I can see a couple of thumbs up. That's reassuring. Good start. I'm Alex. I'm managing director at Proteus. I spend a lot of my time out speaking to organizations that we're sort of looking to work with. So hearing lots and lots of challenges in this space. I think everyone who's sort of joined this webinar is likely to recognize and agree with the statement that change is really hard. It's probably getting harder over time. But getting portfolio prioritization right is a key way of making change doable. And on that note, Bijal, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm Bijal. I'm a consulting director at Proteus. And in this session, what we want to give you are some insight into what we've seen work well in other organisations when prioritising their change portfolio. I'm going to talk you through what we've seen are proven conditions for successful prioritisation and 4 key phases that are needed to create and maintain a doable, outcome-focused change portfolio. Now, some of the statements that Alex mentioned and that you reacted to are what we call symptoms of where prioritisation hasn't been done well, and then you're really feeling the impact on the ground. And just to recap on some of those, organisations are saying that projects tend to be running late, they see lots of costs overrun. When you speak to the people on the ground that are involved in delivering change, not just technical delivery resources, but also business SMEs, they say they feel a sense of chaos, and because of that, people tend to be quite demotivated. And you hear delivery teams saying things like, just can't get things over the line, things keep getting delayed, and it's quite unfortunate because then you also tend to see good people leaving organisations where there is that sense of chaos. And of course, if all of these changes are needed to deliver your organisation's strategy, then organisations are not achieving their strategy at the pace that's needed as well. However, with effective prioritisation, there's a very different view. In organisations where it's done well, actually, you see an improved return on investment. Change budgets are very finite, they're very precious, and actually maximising the return on investment on that change budget is really important. Because change is being delivered well, it's being delivered efficiently, what we also see is actually really high staff morale, where people feel they are achieving what they wanted to go out to achieve. The business is saying, yeah, I'm achieving the projects that are key to delivering my strategy. What you tend to also see in organisations where if prioritisation is done well is you get the whole organisation aligned and on achieving a key set of organisation outcomes, and that's everyone is very clear on what that strategy is. And we'll talk a bit more about why there's that clarity, because it's such a key part of forming this prioritisation process. And actually, if the organisation is achieving its strategy, getting good return on investment, then the market has an improved perception on the business, because not only are objectives being delivered, in some cases they're actually being exceeded. So we talk about conditions for success, and I think what tends to be underplayed is organisations sometimes underestimating the fact that portfolio prioritisation is actually very sensitive. Organisations tend to focus on the mechanics of prioritisation, so coming up with quite sophisticated weightings and scoring, but actually what they underestimate is what we call management complexity. So this is actually managing those senior stakeholders that really need to be aligned in order for prioritisation to be effective. And you'll see as I talk you through some of these conditions for success, 5 out of 6 of them is all about getting that stakeholder alignment. The first condition for success is a clear organisation strategy. I mean, this really is the foundation of effective prioritisation, and the exec have to be agreed on it. The next condition for success is actually translating that strategy, which sometimes can be quite high level, into clear outcomes that you can then prioritise your projects against. And those outcomes need to be not just clear, they need to be time bound and measurable as well. It just makes the prioritisation process a lot more objective later on. The second condition for success is clarity on organisation constraints. Now, most organisations will think about cost as a key constraint. It is, but it's not the only one. What we're hearing more and more is actually resource capacity is a key constraint when it comes to prioritisation and delivering change effectively. So organisations need to be very clear on what those constraints are. Having a senior leader accountable for the prioritisation is really important. One organisation we worked with recently, it was actually the CEO. They were accountable for ensuring the prioritisation process was done effectively, and actually they were accountable for rallying around the exec team and ensuring they were playing their part in making organisation prioritisation effective. Effective governance. So this is about having the right forum with the right visibility, the right behaviours and the right people to make organisation prioritisation effective. And then having senior leaders aligned on what they want to prioritise against. So we've been in organisations where some senior leaders are saying the most important thing is benefit. It's all about driving benefit. Actually, the CFO in the room is saying, no, it's not just benefit, it's return on investment. So making sure that those senior leaders are aligned on what's important in terms of key attributes they want to prioritise against, and having that agreed up front is really key. We talk about 4 phases of effective prioritisation, and there's some key points I want to bring out before we get into the detail of some of these phases. This process is iterative. After you finish one phase, which is key in terms of informing the next phase, so the output from understanding the strategy will be key in terms of defining how you evolve your outcomes over time. it's iterative going forward, but it's also iterative in terms of coming back. So once you've got a list of prioritized projects, you need to check back and ensure, have you taken into account your organisation constraints, and actually has that set of prioritized projects, will that still deliver your organisation strategy and outcome? What you see actually on this diagram also is that prioritisation and sequencing is not until much later on. It's the third phase. Those first two phases form the foundation, are actually fundamental to get right to ensure that you have effectively prioritised your portfolio. In phase 3, we talk about not just getting to a prioritised list of projects, but actually sequencing things in the right way, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail later. And then the last phase, which many organisations don't do, is ongoing portfolio prioritisation. I'll bring that to life and get to that point later. So under each phase, there's a number of steps, and I'm not going to go through each step, given the time we have. But what I think is important is to call out what we tend to see are the steps that most organisations don't do. And we're going to give you some visuals that hopefully are quite helpful to help, if you were to do this in your organisation, just some visuals that you may want to use and the ways to think about some of those steps in order to really create an impact. So this first step around understanding the organisation strategy and outcomes, most organisations are very clear on the problem statement and why they're doing what they want to do. They probably have also agreed at some level some outcomes and some assumptions that sit behind the outcomes. What organisations don't tend to do, however, is have a conversation with the exec and be very aligned on how ambitious they want to be in terms of delivering that strategy. So let me bring that to life. There's a couple of attributes that are key to supporting the strategy. So a really simple way of presenting this and discussing this with the exec team would be to list those attributes in a table like we have here. And so, for example, for one organisation, operating model and how far they want to transform their existing operating model was key in terms of defining how ambitious they want to be. So the example here, the organisation wasn't just looking at fundamentally reshaping their own operating model, they also needed to think about how they were shaping and changing the way they work with partners who were also key to delivering that strategy. And other attributes, and you could do the same thing for each of these, how ambitious do we want to be in terms of changing the culture and behaviour in the organisation, ways of working with partners, how far do we want to go in terms of being digital and data enabled. The other step most organisations don't do, and I touched on it earlier, is actually being really clear on what the organisation's constraints are. There could be regulatory constraints an organisation has to adhere to. There could be key events happening in the calendar in business operations that the organisation has to be very mindful of, and actually understanding those up front will definitely make your prioritisation step later on much easier. The next phase is about evolving those outcomes over time. And most organisations don't do this step at all. So if I bring that to life, you've got a 5-year strategy. And what we say is we talk about journey planning. So you break that 5-year strategy down into what we call transition state. And at the end of each transition state, you'd be very clear on the outcomes you're going to deliver. You'd be very clear on the cost to achieve that transition state. You'd be clear on the impact on the organisation's run rate as a result of doing what you're going to do and the change that is implemented as part of that transition state. And you'd be clear on the financial benefits that are going to be delivered. Now, what tends to happen in organisations, they've got clarity on what good looks like at the end of 5 years. Probably don't know what good looks like in years 3 and 5. but that's okay. Sorry, in year 3 and 4, but that's okay. What we recommend is actually get the clarity for at least transition state 1. And actually that transition state is all about increasing stakeholder confidence. So think about the outcomes and the capabilities you want to deliver so that you can drive stakeholder confidence up, that you are on track to deliver your 5-year strategy. And actually, if you've got clarity on what good looks like in terms of outcomes and capabilities for transition state 1, which could be the next 9 to 12 months, then your prioritization can be focused on those next 9 to 12 months. Most organisations know what they're doing in terms of in-flight projects and how they might map those to the organisation's strategy and outcomes. What many don't do actually is sit back and say, so what are the capabilities I need to deliver these outcomes? And actually, are there new things I need to add on to this portfolio? And if I think back to the previous phase where we said we need to be really ambitious in certain aspects, have I got all the right projects on this portfolio that allow me to deliver that level of ambition? So it's not just about the in-flight, it's also thinking about new projects that are needed and how do they map across to the future outcomes. This next phase, and like I said, this comes much later down the process in terms of this is actually getting into the nub of prioritization, sequencing, and optimizing delivery. Now, what we tend to find is organizations are in such a rush to prioritize, they don't tend to do any of these 4 steps, which are actually key to do this step effectively. So the first step is about getting agreement with your execs around what's the right balance for this portfolio. How much do we want to spend on regulatory change, which is a must, but how much do we actually want to spend from our change portfolio on regulatory change? How much of this portfolio should be focused on driving financial benefit? How much of the portfolio should be about driving projects that we call enablers? And how much of the portfolio is about projects that are just needed to keep the lights on and keep business operations going? And actually having agreement on that up front allows, when you need to make trade-offs later, when you're actually getting into the nub of prioritization, that agreement up front, again, sets a really good foundation to have those trade-off conversations later. So once you've agreed what the right balance looks like, I've just presented here a visual that is a really simple, actually, 2x2, where in this case, the 2 attributes the organisation said was key for them was how well does each project align to the organisation's outcome, and actually how much benefit does it drive. And just by doing this in a really simple visual, you can see that ones in the bottom left are ones where actually outcome alignment is low, benefit is low. We may need to have a discussion around pausing or deferring them. The ones in the top right, high impact on the outcome, high benefit, and those are the ones we really need to make sure they're safe. And then there's probably a discussion needed on the rest, because some of them, like I said before, could be regulatory, where we say, well, we just have to do them, but we might need to do them in a different way. Or some of them could just be key enablers we need to keep going on. Another step that then needs to happen, so once you've got a potential prioritised list, is about really understanding the cost of those projects, the benefit, the resource requirements needed. And when we talk about resources, we're talking about SMEs that are needed to deliver the project, delivery resources, so might be enterprise architects, project managers, but also the support services resources, which most projects need, and actually at some level, it really can add up if you don't account for those effectively. And we talk about support services resources, I'm talking about procurement resources, finance, legal, etc. And actually having that information on that prioritised list of projects then informs the next stage, which is about sequencing those projects in the right order so that you make the best use of the resources that are available. You take into account change load impact. So, most end of years in organisations might be, March, probably the wrong time to land a big change into the finance department. So it's about sequencing things in the right order. And that's what we call a doable change portfolio. Again, a key step that most organisations tend to leave out. They stop at the prioritised list and then wonder why they're not landing things when they need to land them. And then actually, once you've got your doable portfolio, the next step is about organising that portfolio into what we call effective delivery portfolios, which increase the probability of the change landing successfully and efficiently. So let me bring that to life. You may have a group of projects where it's all about driving the ambition and delivering an ambition to do something on the digital data front that is very different. The organisation's never done it before, but it's really needed to make you get ahead of the game, ahead of your competitors. In that example, you've got now a portfolio full of projects that are high uncertainty, lots of complexity. That kind of portfolio needs to be sponsored by somebody who can deal with that level of ambiguity, who has the capacity to be there to address some of the ambiguity, but also needs a portfolio lead that has that similar mindset, who can deal with ambiguity. If that portfolio lead tries to produce a 1,000-line Gantt chart to try and deliver that portfolio, it won't deliver successfully. The last phase is all about ongoing portfolio prioritisation. And like I said before, typically this step is not done at all. So just think you've gone through phases 1, 2, and 3. You've now created a really good, doable portfolio of change. Everything's nicely sequenced. And then with the regulatory environment we have, where things are constantly changing, the pace of technology change and the pace at which market trends tend to evolve in most industries nowadays, that portfolio is never going to be constant. There's going to be new things that want to come onto the portfolio, and what's needed at this point is the right governance and the right approach to take on anything new in a safe way that doesn't undermine the doability of the portfolio. It's about knowing how to impact assess something very quickly and then having the right forums to make decisions on something new is coming on, it needs to come on. What are we stopping? What are we deferring? Or actually, are we making a decision to add on more resources, more budget to take this on safely? And then that final step is around ongoing reviews. So as part of doing steps 1, 2, and 3, what you should have delivered is what we call an outcome chain. So the boxes 1, 2, and 3 on the left are probably your key outcomes that the organisation wants to deliver. We then talk about assigning outcomes to capabilities, KPIs, and then a list of projects that are needed to deliver those capabilities. This outcome chain needs to be reviewed on an ongoing basis. Portfolio prioritisation is not a one-off exercise. It's not something that's done as part of annual planning. It needs to be reviewed on a regular basis. And actually, this outcome traceability, we recommend should be reviewed at least quarterly, given the pace of change. And what that will do, it will give you and your exec that confidence that actually what we've got on the project portfolio is needed to deliver the organisation strategy, but also the organisation strategy is still valid given everything else that's changing around it.